Pues empezamos la segunda parte, ya solo nos quedan dos charlas. Tommy creo que va a hablar en inglés, porque tiene dos opciones, o habla en inglés o habla en portuñol. Entonces, complicado. Tommy, bueno, él empezó en la parte de Shotgun, luego lo compró Autodesk, estuvo muchísimo tiempo, se vino a España porque seguro que le engañó la mujer para decirle que en España se vivía mejor, y al final acabaron en Portugal. Estuvo y está de freelance, pasó por la parte de la competencia de Shotgrid, que eso da una visión muy importante, porque es una visión distinta. Él estuvo en F-Track, pero ha vuelto otra vez con nosotros aquí a la parte buena. Dios.
It's a nice bottle.
Y nada, él nos va a contar sobre todo la parte de integración de USD con Shotgrid. Igual es un especialista bastante bueno. Si tenéis proyectos donde creéis que puede encajar en vuestra persona. Yo me enrollo. Tommy.
Obrigado. Gracias. Sí. Hablo un poco español, pero porque vivo hablo mucho portuñol y no está bien. So yeah, I'll speak English. So yeah, thanks very much to Victor and Tangram for having me out. I lived in Madrid in 2019 and just up until the pandemic broke out, and moved back to the States for a while. But I really enjoyed always coming here to these events, right? It's so great that Tangram gets the community together like this around Shotgrid, because that's important. I'll talk a little bit more about community later, but any problem you're trying to solve, odds are someone else has run into it. And this group of people and others like us, I think we're all often very willing to help each other figure these things out, and are often like forging new territory in how we track productions and how we gain efficiencies, and make things better for ourselves, make our lives better and our friends' lives better. So today, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about USD and Shotgrid. So I recently, as Victor mentioned, I spent almost 9 years working at Shotgrid, Shotgun at the time. I started there a couple of years before Shotgun joined Autodesk, and then was there for a number of years. I worked from, go to my intro slide here. I worked on the product team initially, and then went into the support team. I led a consulting team there for a while, and it was a great experience. It was a great team, and I learned a lot during those years. And so now I'm doing consulting, like Victor said. I spent a couple years at F-Track, and we won't talk much about that today. But yeah, now I'm just doing consulting, and I found the part of my job at Shotgun that I liked the most was just helping productions. Helping studios figure out problems that Shotgun didn't solve out of the box. So I still like to do that. And my background before joining Shotgun was in production management, primarily. I worked in feature animation. And so I was a Shotgun customer, and then really drank the Kool-Aid and went to work for them. So talking about USD today, I'm talking about this because I had a client that I worked with at the end of last year that was building a new pipeline based around USD, and just needed help figuring out what to do with Shotgrid as part of that process. And I learned a lot because I hadn't worked with USD much before that. I come from a production management background, not an artistic or technical background, although I have led pipeline teams, so I have some technical understanding. But I learned a lot about USD during that time, and I'm still learning. But so some of this discussion will be about sort of the approach you want to take when trying to figure out something like this, how to kind of retool your pipeline, whether it's around USD or something else entirely. A bit about change management and about what sort of things to think about in terms of your use of a system like Shotgrid as you're making big changes like this. So I have a warning here. You may come away with more questions than answers. That's, I'm sorry, I don't have all the answers, but I think we'll come up with some good questions together. And also a note that I don't have any association with Autodesk anymore, nor Backlight or F-Track. So I'm speaking my opinions on my own, and I don't really have a lot of inside knowledge anymore of what's coming or what's going on with Shotgrid. So I'm not going to give anything away because I don't know anything. We'll see if you get a few peeks at what's coming from David later. But I know they are, as they announced, they're working on sort of a new generation of tools and the flow and those things. So it'll be interesting to see what those things become. But this discussion is about what Shotgrid is today and some of what kind of I've learned trying to build in the concepts related to USD. So what is USD? I think most people, anybody not familiar at all with USD? Anyone never heard of it? Yeah, whatever. Okay, so just quickly, it stands for Universal Scene Description. It's something that was developed by Pixar back around 2010, I think. And then they made it open source around 2016, and it's been adopted by a number of tool builders, a number of DCC developers across the industry. And it's basically an interchange format. It's a way to describe a scene in CG production in a way that's common, so that it'll be a lot easier to work between packages like Maya and Max and Houdini and Unreal. All of those I just named are all implementing support for USD for OpenUSD as an interchange format, as a file format. So it's great. It's a great effort. It's an open standard, and it's an effort to standardize how we pass CG data back and forth, for animation and VFX, as well as games, any sort of digital modeling workflow. So some things that are different, just at a high level with USD, we think about digital assets. We think about models and rigs and textures, and I think we're used to thinking about them as like a cache or a group of files that's saved somewhere. And USD adds this layer of abstraction where you have basically these text files that are defining what an asset is. So it's telling you like, an asset is not just this file saved on disk over here. It's this asset uses this cache and this texture, and it has these kinds of variants. It's building a simplified layer in the middle of all the files and caches you have saved that make it much easier to, one, pass that data around between different platforms that support it, and two, to kind of swap things out and be less destructive when you have to make changes in production. It's something that changes a little bit of how you think about assets, but we'll talk a little more about that as we get into it. On the shot side, there's I think one of the biggest values that USD brings is this concept of layers, where sort of levels or layers, where you have these sort of overrides on different levels. So you can set something up at a scene level, and then you can override it at a shot level, or at different levels depending on kind of what you're trying to do. So it's another same kind of thing. You have these text files that are defining which pieces of what things to use kind of as they're being loaded into the software. I will say, I think from the experience I've been through in terms of Shotgrid and how you can track and think about things, we definitely focused a lot more on the asset side of things than the shot side of things. I think there's potential to change the way you track both of those or not, but there's decisions to be made on both sides. But definitely the asset side is, I think, where the bigger immediate impact is. So here's some of the challenges. I think it's a big change, right? It's if you're adopting USD, you're either adopting a new kind of generation of some of the software you use at a minimum, or you're maybe redoing your entire pipeline, rebuilding your entire pipeline mostly from scratch. So there's a lot to do. But on the production tracking side, I think is where you've got to really think through how you approach it, because speaking myself as a former production manager, a lot of times you have developers and TDs talking about what's going on in the pipeline side. Your eyes glaze over a little bit, and it's like, yeah, I get it, but like, when's it going to be done? So you don't always need to know exactly how the sausage is being made on the production side. You just got to make sure it's being made on time and on schedule and being delivered when you need it, right? And sometimes I think it is helpful. I think I always definitely lean towards the technical side, wanted to dig in more and understand more about what people were doing, so I could, sometimes you really need to be able to like ask the right questions, and sometimes second guess when someone says, oh yeah, it'll be done tomorrow. It's like, but wait a minute, I know that's not as simple as you're making that sound. So there's advantages to production people maybe having their head a little more around how stuff is actually being executed. But you also don't want to overcomplicate things for production, because production management in itself is a hard job. If you know exactly how everything's done and exactly what it takes, it's still really hard to know how to schedule it and to know how many resources you'll need and how to make sure that everything goes right to get that stuff delivered on time. So, you don't want to completely overburden someone who's trying to do that scheduling with a bunch of stuff they don't need to be thinking about. Like, there's enough variables. You want to kind of be strategic about how much of that you build into the scheduling process. The other challenge, the biggest challenge I think that we dealt with in terms of mapping some of this workflow into Shotgrid is there's this concept of you can sort of infinitely nest things in USD, right? There's this arbitrary structure where you can have a variant of an asset, and then that variant can use another variant, and you can have sets of variants, and you kind of go really deep in this nested structure of things, which is great. It's a great level of flexibility from the pipeline side, but can be really hard to kind of visualize in terms of seeing and understanding all the dependencies you're dealing with. And there's a bunch of new text files that pipeline people need to deal with. You may or may not need production people to know about them or know the mechanics of how they affect how things are loaded and dealt with. But that's another factor. Also, this multi-level inheritance where things can be overridden at different levels can complicate things a bit. Also, my last point on the pipeline side is it's a rapidly evolving landscape of interoperability with this open standard, right? It's still new. It's been around a while, but it's still really just getting close to achieving sort of a mass adoption. So there's still things it doesn't. OpenUSD does not support yet. It doesn't support live animation curves yet, as I understand it. It's just baked out animation. So there's things, and that's probably coming soon, but there's a lot of things that are still evolving with USD. So adopting it now, you have to sort of understand that landscape and know what you're getting into. So some of the choices in terms of thinking about what Shotgrid would look like if you're adopting USD in your workflow. There's I call it the KISS approach, keep it simple, stupid, which is kind of don't really let the production people think too much about what the pipeline's doing, right? Basically, on some level, you're still building assets to use in shots to deliver, on a schedule. I think you can still schedule things the way you used to from a production management standpoint. I think there will be some challenges trying to do it that way. I think eventually you'll find trying to do that there's some things that would help that process if you sort of built in a little more of how USD is thinking about things. But to begin with, that's you don't necessarily have to change anything in Shotgrid. Also, the studio I worked with, and I assume a lot of studios would be approaching it this way. If you're rebuilding your pipeline to leverage USD, you're likely building a lot of tools on the pipeline side to interact with this new structure and to deal with these dependencies. So part of this simple approach could be just giving the production people some visibility or some pages or functions within the pipeline tools that you're building. I'll mention some of the features in Shotgrid you might leverage in this process later. And one of the easy features to leverage there is the ability to embed a web page in the Shotgrid interface, right? So if you have a web UI that you've already built for your pipeline that you can use to visualize dependencies or nested variants, then you could just sort of surface that in the right place in Shotgrid and let people go there, get into the pipeline that way if they need to. And if not, just stay out of it and do the scheduling like they did before. There's the other end of the spectrum. You could try and build your whole pipeline around Shotgrid as sort of the central UI and way of interacting with it. I don't talk a lot about this because I don't recommend doing this. I think there's, a lot that you can, a lot of more technical and advanced features of Shotgrid you could leverage in this process in terms of the pipeline integrations. But I think something I'll talk about, having been at Shotgrid and AppTrack, both have pipeline ecosystems. And I think there's others out there. There's some of the more sort of third-party ones that Alfonso talked about. But I think it's a little risky, I think, building your whole pipeline around a proprietary pipeline system, right? And that's, I don't know if I'd still be saying this if I still worked at Autodesk, but I think it's fair to consider, and I think a lot of clients have to take this into account, is that, the products change and some products come and go. And like, if you spend a lot of time building a whole pipeline deeply embedded into every technical function of something like Shotgrid, there's a bit of risk there, right? That there could be changes, there could be things outside of your control that can affect the functionality there. So, I recommend at least having some sort of wrapper layer between the pipeline tools of the ecosystem you're using and the tool set itself. Give yourself some future proofing so that not that you can't leverage a lot of the power and strength built into these tools, but give yourself an out if you do need to change course at some point in the future. But I think the most realistic approach is a hybrid of the two, right? I think I think you can leverage some of the features of Shotgrid to expose some of the features / complexity of USD while also not like blowing the minds of all your production people and making them relearn how to do their job completely. So I'll talk a little bit about those here. And then some other choices that you have to make, and this applies a little more globally to making any big pipeline changes at your studio. So it's where to start. I think, like I said, I think with this client that I worked with recently, we saw a lot more changes that needed to happen on the asset side of things. So we started thinking about the asset pipeline. Also, that's probably the first part of your project that's going to start, right? So starting to think about the asset workflow and how you're going to deal with that. And then seeing how that ties into the shot side is the choice we made here. But that's something to think about, is where, if you're sort of retooling your whole pipeline, like, where do you start? Where to create tasks is another question. So one thing with USD is, assets, this concept of prims that is, and Shotgrid has always sort of had this idea, is that when you talk about an asset, you're talking sort of about this conceptual idea of an asset. You're not necessarily talking about version 5 or this particular cat. You're talking about the buck bunny character that you have to build for this demo media that we've seen for many, many years. But you're talking about the idea of an asset. You're not talking about every specific thing that you're building. So USD works a similar way, right? You have the idea of an asset and say, okay, I know we need this character. I know we need to build a bunny named Buck. But then when you actually build it, when you start piecing together these variants, that's what you have. You have a number of different variants that you can choose from, and whenever you use that asset, you're gonna use one or more of those variants. So then the question in Shotgrid becomes, where do you create the tasks? If you start tracking variants in Shotgrid alongside your core asset concepts, where along with maybe sets of assets and things, you want to think strategically about where you create the tasks that you're going to track the work against, because you can create a task, as you probably know, on against almost anything in Shotgrid. So a lot of times that's one of the early important decisions, is where do I put my tasks so everyone knows where to find them and where I can see them in the right context within different reports and different views in Shotgrid. Who to involve is an important choice, and when. I didn't put that here, but this is not something you want one developer to go sit in the closet and build over the course of 9 months or a year. Obviously, you need multiple people involved. You want people involved, obviously, ideally a team of people involved in building and executing these changes, but you also want to make sure you get stakeholders from different parts of production, right? You're probably going to need to do that to convince everyone to do an overhaul to your pipeline anyway, but especially when you're revamping the way you work or even introducing Shotgrid for the first time, you want to make sure that you build advocates in the different departments. So that involves, really clearly illustrating the advantages you see of going down this path. Talk about what you see, the reasoning for it, what you see is the reward for going down the path of this rebuild or this reboot, and finding people that see the same vision in different departments around the studio. Because then not only does that help give you some backup and other people that are saying, yeah, what we believe what they're saying, and this is going to help. We should all do this. But you also then have these sort of what becomes a team of sort of super users and people that were involved in this process along the way. That when you start to roll all this new stuff out to production, these are people that are just sitting all around, virtually or in person. There are sitting all around the people that are new to all this and they're starting to learn this and can be there to help kind of pat their friends on the shoulders and say, yeah, it's going to be okay. We thought of this, or we're taking feedback. We're going to turn around changes quickly when we hit rough edges. So it just helps a lot to have to make this a team approach when you're doing this, a big rebuild or a big reboot of how you track your production. Think ahead of time about what project you want to test with. That can help drive your timeline for this sort of pipeline rebuild or rollout. You want to be pretty particular about selecting the right kind of project to test with too. Obviously you might start with just some random test data, but when you're ready to try this thing start to finish on a real project, you want to make sure you can try and this isn't always a luxury we have, but try to pick a project that's not on an extremely tight timeline, because you got to recognize that trying new stuff on a project, stuff's going to break. Like there's going to be issues. There's going to be time that people need to learn things. So try and pick a project that's not the most stressful timeline and high pressure project you can. And something obvious, and ideally a project that's not, using some other brand new technology that's not already complicated for other reasons. That's not full of, simulations that you've never done before. Like pick a project that's fairly like you kind of know how to do it and that you don't have to deliver tomorrow. Because it's going to take the pressure off and get you better feedback and get everyone more time to be comfortable with the changes. And that's a bit about how to transition. You also want to think about, I'm going to talk about this later in the sort of do's and don'ts, but you don't, initially you're probably going to have these two systems sort of running in parallel, right? You'll have some projects going in the old system and some projects you'll launch into the new one. But you want to try and minimize the time that you're running parallel systems, because really you're doubling up the mental energy that people have to use to do their jobs, right? So you want to try and define a clear timeline. Okay, we're going to start testing here. If everything goes well, we'll sunset the old system about here, like 6 months later or whatever it is, so that there's a limited time. If people are doing double duty and trying to do things in two places. Think about how to archive your old data, because a lot of times you're rolling out a new pipeline, you're going to break the old one at some point. So and you don't necessarily just want to save everything, because then it's a big mess that no one ever wants to dig through. So think about what's valuable in that data from the old projects and try to archive that in an intentional way that makes it useful and browsable by people. And then in terms of Shotgrid, if you're embarking on this pipeline rebuild, you want to think about do we just declare bankruptcy and start over completely on Shotgrid? Like if you've been using Shotgrid for 10 years, there's probably a number of things you'd like to be different about that Shotgrid setup. And that's not just a Shotgrid thing, that's any system, right? You've been using it for a long time. You're going to have some cruft in there. You're going to have some things like, what's that field do? And no one knows, because that was put in there by somebody that left the company 3 years ago. And I actually worked with a client once that had an automation running that no one knew what server it was on. So no one knew how to stop it or change it. So there's just don't make it mad. Just don't piss it off. It's like, we can't stop it, but as long as we don't do this, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. So sometimes this may be a good time. If you're changing your whole pipeline, it might be a good time to be like, hey guys, this is a good time to just start over and transition to a whole new tracking server. So some opportunities here. So simplifying the transition. I think something you can leverage that's a nice feature of Shotgun is Shotgrid. That's some of the tooltips, the features where you can actually, you can put in descriptions of some of the fields that you make, and they can surface when you roll over the column header. Just little things like that. Sometimes that's an afterthought. It's like, I'm not going to bother with that, but little details like that can make it to where instead of someone totally getting blocked and having to go find somebody to what the hell is this new thing? I don't get it. It's like, oh, they find this tooltip, and it's just like, oh yeah, I remember someone talking about that now. So just little things like that can really help ease the friction. Um, Using, having really thinking through the way you sort and group your stuff in Shotgrid, making it kind of match the way people are thinking about the pipeline or about how things are structured. So it's, ideally you don't want it where everyone's looking at something on the pipeline side or looking at what you have to deliver. They see all this stuff and then they look at Shotgrid and it doesn't look anything like one doesn't look like the other, right? The more you can make it sort of familiar in some way, the easier it can be for people to grasp. Also think about the terminology you use. It may make sense, there's going to be a new set of terminology. And I think a big thing with OpenUSD specifically is defining what people call things, and everybody's sort of agreeing on that. So on the one hand, I think you do want to kind of get people into that world, but on the other hand, if there's a term that your studio uses to talk about like things like acid variants, and it's going to be a lot more familiar to use that term, then start with that. And then maybe you can tackle the like shifting to the more industry standard term down the road. But if you can make it familiar to them and keep it simplified at first, then you can do that. And the great thing about Shotgrid is that all the way things are labeled, the names of fields, like you can change those things like without breaking everything, right? So so think about it from the perspective of someone that's scared and stumbling into this new world that you're building, and try and give them these things to recognize and to be familiar with, to hang on to. Updating Shotgrid, changing how you use Shotgrid along with these pipeline changes. Like I said, you don't want to necessarily overhaul everything so it's all completely new, but it is a good time to revisit any sort of nagging issues you've had, right? If you're already putting some time into rebuilding pipeline stuff and you're maybe changing some automations or integrations that have to do with Shotgrid, maybe think about some of the things on the list that people have been complaining about for a while, because that's one really good way to get people bought into a big change like this, is to immediately lead off with why it's going to be better for them, right? There's like, hey, that thing you've been complaining about for a year and a half, we fixed it. Whether that was fixed because of USD change or it's completely unrelated, like roll it out at the same time, right? Be like, hey, also, this is just for you. You don't have to do that. You don't have to click that button 3 times and turn around in a circle before you publish something anymore. So just getting some wins for people, it's helpful. Allocating resources, the more resources you can allocate to this, I mean, obviously there's a limit and you're always going to be fighting for these resources because, production has to keep going, but don't, if you can, convince people this is something that you should invest in, right? It's not something to like try and get by with one person doing this for a year and a half. We need to, like, if you can invest and get the right people involved and make a focused and concerted effort, then, I think you can build this in a way that it's going to work more quickly, and it's going to be thought through, and not just like, yeah, sorry, okay, that's kind of half working and this is sort of broken here, but it kind of works now, so try it. And we'll fix things, someday. You want to try and get the resources you can to like really address issues that come up and keep it running as smoothly as possible when you roll it out. And then thinking about education and being intentional with how you introduce this stuff to people. Invest in some time building some new documentation and have classes where you give people an hour to go and sit down and sit together and go over in detail, like what's going to change, why is it going to change, does anyone have any questions? Do that regularly, many times over the course of the rollout. You really just want to hold people's hand and make them comfortable with the fact that, like, yeah, it's not all going to work perfectly right out the gate, but if something breaks, there's people here that are going to work quickly to fix it. And if you have a question, if you don't understand it, there's documents to help, and there's people here that you can ask. Right? And clean up. This is another good opportunity to go back and archive old stuff. I think everyone has it. And if you've been using any kind of system for any amount of time, it's like, takes the opportunity to go in and clear things up so somebody can come into this fresh new space and go, oh yeah, it's nice in here. This is going to be a nice new world that we're moving into. Thinking about accessibility, this goes along with a little bit of what I was talking about earlier, but use those tool tips, put strategic links. If you're not bringing the whole pipeline into Shotgrid, at least have maybe there's some places, on an asset, you could have a custom field that has a link to a repository where you can see more of, the file structure, the USD structure of that asset. So leverage linking out to other systems where you can't, reflect or bring in that system directly in front of the people in Shotgrid. Yeah, I mean, a few of these things are sort of common sense, but again, onboarding and training, revisit your documentation. So yeah, just make it good and accessible for people. A few useful features in Shotgrid. None of this is probably groundbreaking to people that have been using Shotgrid for a while, but entity links are useful. So you can create links between basically anything in Shotgrid. And that's one nature of USD is there's a lot more ability to have sort of interdependent things. So you can definitely reflect those links. So, I have a sort of an example I mocked up here where you have, in this case, you may decide to introduce a custom field for USD type because within assets, you need to know whether you're talking about, again, that general concept of an asset or an asset variant or a variant set or something like that. So you might modify assets with a type parameter specific to the USD entity it represents. And then you can use the parent and sub asset relationship to show how they're related to other assets and other variants within the system. You can also leverage those links to make different custom views in different places within the UI, which is another good thing to think about. Is like, where might it be useful to see these things? Like, yeah, I want to see it on the asset detail page, but I also want to have an asset page maybe grouped in such a way that I can see these things together. Custom entities as well. This is something that you can get carried away with. So this is something to think about and be specific about where and when you leverage a custom entity. But as you may know, you can always create, if Shotgrid doesn't have the concept of something you need to track, you can use a custom entity and create a new thing to track those. So you may want a custom entity to track like layers. So that's that kind of override concept where you can build layers in a shot and define sort of different variants and things that you're using on the USD side. So that's an example of something you may want to use. Again, and if you're going with that really simple approach, maybe you don't want to use any custom entity. Like maybe you leave that out altogether, and maybe you have those reflected in some pipeline tool. You don't want to bring them in and complicate things too much. But a few strategic custom entities here and there may be helpful. Here's the tooltips I mentioned before, and we'll hit you overhead with those either. But this is kind of an example of what I was talking about, where you can, if you do create a new field like USD type, you can have a nice detailed description of why that's there, what that means, why I care about it. And then the ability to embed a web page, right? So didn't spend a lot of time making a really nice example UI here, but presumably you have, and you can just embed that right in Shotgrid in the right place. Could be helpful to improve that accessibility and help people get to where they need to. And then there's a pipeline integration too. So like I said before, I don't recommend going all in and using every pipeline feature there, but there are some really nice integration features built into Shotgrid and the integrations there. And what's nice is that they're source available, so you can actually get in and customize how they work. So especially if you're already using any of the Shotgrid pipeline integrations, you can fork the code for those and update those so they're you're working with some of the same interfaces and things, but they're leveraging your USD structure. So something you could certainly look into. A couple of precautions. Complexity is almost always the enemy in Shotgrid. Really easy to overcomplicate things. So the way you avoid that is, like I said, getting user feedback, getting those advocates in different departments. They can say, oh, hold on a second. Like my layout team is not going to know what the hell you're talking about. We need to rethink what this page looks like. Like I said, be selective about the data you expose. Don't just throw every bit of data. You're going to have a lot of data in any pipeline, especially USD pipeline. Don't just throw it all in Shotgrid because you can. Think about what you need there and who's going to leverage it, who's going to need it before you shove it in. Document and use tooltips. Can't say that enough. Build a lot of super users and advocates, and then continue to check in. Like don't launch your new pipeline, then maybe spend a few days answering questions, and then move on to a whole other project. Like plan to have resources available to help people and to take feedback and to fix things and iterate on that feedback quickly when it happens. don't assume anything. Like, be prepared to hear anything. Be prepared to hear that some foundational assumption you had was completely wrong. Like, the more humble you can be in this process, the better. Don't overlook the education, documentation side. Don't, like I said, don't do the developer in the closet for 9 months. Don't build without feedback. Don't expect users to just figure it out. Even if you've built something that's super user friendly and you feel like it's gorgeous, go over the top, trying to make sure that people have the help they need and the explanations of how things work. Also think about the views. One thing Joaquin was talking about earlier, how you can build custom views for everyone in Shotgrid, right? Every department can have their own custom views. And sometimes it's tempting to just proactively build totally different views for totally different groups of users all over Shotgrid, but don't do that until you know you need to, right? Like, definitely work with people that need something different than what is kind of a standard you've built. But having more views also means you have more pages to navigate, and you have more stuff that somebody else might just run across and like, wait, I'm lost. Like, what is this? So just be specific and strategic about where you need specific views, or where some certain views might be generic enough to be shared across different types of usage. And like I said before, don't leave old and new systems running in parallel forever. It really does double the mental capacity you need to use to get anything done. Really. Carrot versus stick. So this is, I think always nice to use the carrot instead of the stick. You're not saying like, hey guys, bite the bullet. We have to start using this new pipeline. It's going to happen on Monday. Suck it up. It's happening. Don't fight it. Have the carrot. Have the like, hey everyone, here's what you're going to get out of this. Here's why we're doing it. Hopefully, a lot of these people were involved in this decision and know the reason behind it. But also, assure them that we're here to help. Anything that doesn't go just as planned, we're going to fix it quickly. It's not going to jeopardize your deliveries. We've thought this through, and then plan to have those resources available to iterate quickly. Don't roll something out and then say, yeah, we'll do another pass on fixing stuff in 3 months. We'll gather a lot of input in that time. Like, no, you gotta be fixing anything that's glaringly broken those first few weeks, and hopefully the first few months that it's out there. Yeah, overloading Shotgrid. I think I made this point, but yeah, don't put stuff in there just to put it in. Be selective about what's in there, because complexity is your enemy, and Shotgrid can be really complex really quickly if you don't manage that. So yeah, that's mostly it. I just want to say about community. I sort of said it at the top, but there's a lot of people in this room and beyond who are great minds who potentially worked with Shotgrid or other systems for a long time, that you want to just reach out and collaborate with other people as you're solving these problems, because you're not the only one that's going to run across them, and you're probably not the only one struggling with them right now. So build a team, not just within your studio, but within your community. I think it's nice that I think the industry's evolved a lot to where I think there was a time when everybody had their own secret sauce in production, and everyone was very protective of how they did things. And I think things are a lot more generally collaborative now, I think. And I just the existence of Shotgrid is sort of evidence of that, right? The fact that we've gone to a model where not everyone is building their own DCC apps and tracking tools anymore, that people are using some of the same stuff. And you also know that a lot of us in here have worked for the same studios and gone on to the same other studios. There's a lot of people circulating around working the same places in the industry. And so the more that you can collaborate, and if you can talk to another studio and you can figure out the same way to solve a challenging problem, then the people that may work for you today and work for the other studio tomorrow and then come back to your studio, the next day, those people are going to kind of have some continuity around how you approach some of these issues. I'm also a Dallas Mavericks fan, and I'm sure some of you probably know Luka Doncic from his time in Madrid. But anyway, that's it for me, really. Happy to have some questions, but or discuss more throughout the afternoon. But thank you. Any quick questions or time we have? Oh, sorry, Alfonso.
The considering implementing this as we did.
Yep.
What could be our start and a brand new Shotgrid altogether? Try to clean up the garbage.
Yeah.
also like, let's say, like, what you
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So there's cleaning up the old garbage could be a good start. I mean, you can always get. I guess I say that I shouldn't commit this, but I think you may be able to work with the Shotgrid team to get a copy of your server as a backup. I don't know if that's something. Yeah, it said yes. Good. So reach out to the Shotgrid support team and have them make a copy of your server. If you want to go in and say, okay, we need to cut up a lot of this cruft, go in and trim it down and say, okay, here we go. This is cleaner. Let's try moving forward with this. Or yeah, like I said, you can certainly start a new instance and start to just simplify without changing anything about the pipeline, right? Like say, okay, we're going to start from scratch, especially because, if that server's been around a while, a lot of the people that were insistent on the way that it's set up now may not even work there anymore, right? So you're like, you're with this legacy system, and yeah, it's going to take some time and some change, but if you follow some of these same parameters about being vocal about it, having a team of companions that are bought into the change, it doesn't have to take forever. It can be, you could probably work for a few weeks and really get something that's cleaner and get buy-in from the people who need it. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good option. I guess another option that I mentioned early on that a lot of this stuff is still evolving, especially around the USD format. So another option is just waiting a little longer. Like, if you're not dying, then maybe in 6 months or a year, some of this stuff is going to evolve a lot, and maybe there'll be new features rolling out from the developers that you can leverage that may save you some custom work. But that might be the state that you've been in for 2 or 3 years already. So, if that's the case, I would also say don't be afraid to jump in and do that simplification pass. Like rip off the Band-Aid. There'll be some short-term pain, but if you get the right people in place and the right approach, it's doable. Good question.
How do you handle using data where so much sort of bring up to the change? In your experience, what it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about building those advocates. So if it's not just you telling the artist all day long, like, no, you need to change, we have to change. If it's you telling them, nicely that, yeah, there's this new stuff, here's why it's good, but then they're also seeing like the people sitting on either side of them are starting to embrace it, and they might hear someone like, oh man, that publish was way faster, and like, oh, it was so much easier to find what I was looking for. So building those advocates around production, the people that maybe helping to spotlight those things. So maybe you actually, maybe if you're having like regular check-ins with the team about, okay, how's this new rollout going? How are these new tools working with everyone? Have one of those sessions where you have one of the other artists get up and talk about a feature they really like or something that they benefited from, right? So I'd say it's building that team of advocates and making it so that they're not just hearing from you, but they're hearing from other people around production about how much better things. Which, and you could always just get them to that's that's all. Last resort.
Everything approved. Okay, contract more than the USD. Support to the app. Let's take that. Right. I follow this. Because for me, because I'm working, I'm always the drop. Okay, libraries, it's not very nice that you overbring that the people component that is you. Right, at the end of the day, don't see the benefit of the money. It's not. So that's what I like about your presentation. It is breaking that middle. How the big thing is happening of USD is how you get wide change. I like it. So I figure out what you right. If people that you should be on board, that how you can drive the change that is huge. Yeah, mostly it's seeing and with people study the work. And it's not all, and then taking, that's where it's Shotgrid to make it happen. It's not more chicks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And that, back to your question, that may be an approach to someone who's really fighting against this. I mean, on the one hand, if you have a lot of people saying, no, we shouldn't do this, well, maybe you shouldn't do it. like take that step too. It's like, oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is the wrong time to do this transition. Like, let's just wait. But if you have like one or two people that are really holding out or complaining a lot, then you might offer them a seat at the table. So like, well, why are you so against this? And what can we do to change your mind? Like, what would make this worth doing for you? And like, if you can change them from one of the detractors to one of the evangelists, then that's a huge win, right? So yeah, don't just like say like, shut up, I don't want to hear it anymore. Like, yeah, let's hear what they're saying and then maybe include them more in the process. That doesn't always work. Sometimes they'll just try to sabotage you at every turn, but that can be an approach.
Maybe in that patient side, we mentioned that. Yeah, and it stays me. You have to take it, never do it. We can really like it. So I do that's really I'm passionate about. No, yeah, I'm letting her screen sometimes. Okay, we're changing this and stay with them to get that process easy.
Yeah.
And it's not like,
yeah, I mean, I guess I have the luxury of I've mostly worked at larger studios, so there were a lot of people potentially to get involved. Sometimes we even had someone who was dedicated to education or to training. If you got one of those people, great. They should definitely be on this team. But I think at a minimum, you want to try to involve. I mean, from working in feature animation, we always try to involve at least one person from every production department, right? And that's a good idea anyway when you're speccing out this change. I mean, you want to make sure that you're not doing something that's going to totally destroy the workflow of the storyboard department, even though maybe they're not doing a lot with USD, but maybe there's something that they're relying on that that you didn't realize that you're going to touch and change their whole world. So yeah, if you're in a larger studio, I would say that the easy place to start is try and find someone from every department that can be involved. Definitely people that, I think people that are enthusiastic about it. There may be people that have doubts that aren't necessarily bought in, but at least if they're interested in it, they're motivated. That's you want. You don't want someone that's gonna be like, yeah, I've got too many things going on already, but yeah, whatever, I'll go to your meetings. Like, you want someone that's like, no, I feel strongly that we shouldn't do this, or I feel strongly that we should. But as long as they feel strongly, they're going to show up and contribute. That's a good person to have involved. And I guess also another option is to bring in people from outside too. I mean, I guess this is a shameless plug for my own consulting services, but myself and other people like me, sometimes it's really useful to bring in someone from outside because someone, hearing you talking about this thing that you've been planning for a year or two, maybe people are like, yeah, whatever, I know you already you're dead set on this. You have an agenda. I don't trust what you're saying. But you bring someone in from outside that says like, oh yeah, I mean, this could work. And here's why from an unbiased perspective, or even just acts as sort of a therapist and just helps your team talk to each other about it and helps everybody understand where they're coming from. That can help kind of unblock things too. I should have put my email on here, but well, find me on LinkedIn or reach out to Victor or to a number of the people in here that know me. Happy to help with things like this too. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate that.